Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be talking about how to take advantage of certain strange moves that people might make in the opening. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about e4, e5, knight f3, and then somebody plays something weird like this move bishop d3, where they block off the d-pawn. How do we take advantage of it? So if you were looking at what just happened here, we have Stockfish's assessment just dropped considerably. Like it says now the position was slight edge white, now it's slight edge black. And you also see that we have 0 games on the master database. But at least on the lower levels, this is still a fairly popular opening. You see that this actually comes up quite a bit on the amateur levels. So why is it that masters do not play this at all and amateurs play it quite a bit? Well, there are situations where bishop d3 isn't a terrible move. But in this situation, it is. And it is a terrible move because it is blocking the central pawn, preventing normal development. And it's also blocking the center pawn from attacking the center of the board, which is a critical idea in e4, e5 openings. And those things combined, along with the fact that this is actually a very uncomfortable position for the bishop and knight, they are going to be subject to possible fork tricks down the road with the pawn moving from e5 to e4, and we'll go over that in just a minute. It makes this move bishop d3 in e4, e5, it makes it very bad. Now what's interesting is you can actually kind of get away with this development strategy if you take this approach in a Sicilian, like e4, e5, knight f3, d6. Bishop d3 is actually pretty reasonable, and if I turn on the Masters database, we have quite a few games in this. The computer doesn't absolutely hate it for white, and you actually see quite a few top players have actually played this with the white pieces. We have, Rapport, Svidler, Aronian, so some pretty heavy guys have actually tried this with the white pieces. This is generally referred to as the Kopek system, and basically white's idea is white wants to play c3, bishop c2, and then eventually follow up with d4. So why is it so different to do this in the Sicilian as opposed to, say, e4, e5? Well, a really beginner answer would be like, well, there's no threat of e5, e4 because there's no pawn on e5. The more advanced answer is, black has already made a bunch of pawn moves, and the pawn moves that black has made have not been conducive to finishing his kingside development. So he's not going to be rapidly developing the bishop to c5 and putting that huge development pressure on the position that he would in an e4, e5 opening. So basically white has more time. This is more of a closed structure. So white has more time to decide where to put his pieces, and because of that, he can get away with moves that block his center pawns temporarily, as long as he has the intention of getting them back out of the way. So this would be a situation where maybe it would be acceptable. So how do we take advantage of it in e4, e5? e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop d3. This seems awkward to take advantage of, but really it's not. The main thing is to just bring out the other knight. So we're just following really basic chess principles, just knights before bishops, bringing out the knight. But more importantly, we're putting this pressure on e4. And now we're threatening at some point to play d5 and follow that up with e4. And this is actually a very, very awkward pressure for white. I want you to take a look at this assessment bar and watch what happens to it as soon as white plays a move like, let's say white starts going with the Kopek system and plays a move like c3. Look at how far this assessment drops. That's 2 full points of drop. And the reason that the assessment dropped so low is because now d5 is happening. And now when d5 happens, there's going to be this pressure with e4. Now, you may have noticed that, if he takes d5, e4 is not something that black can play right away, because, of course, the knight on c6 is hanging. But how do we respond to takes and then queen takes d5? We're hitting this bishop, which is now loose, and we're threatening pawn to e4. So, the only reasonable move is something like queen e2, and then we would just finish our development very rapidly. We're going to have to move this bishop again. We have to move it a second time. We're going to have to move it a second time regardless, but e4 is a huge threat. We're just threatening to fork. So this is big. If we castled e4, game over. That's it. It's +6, +7 in favor of black. So we are going to have to move this piece a second time. Black is going to rapidly castle, and then we're going to have castles. We're going to have e4. We're going to have takes. White at this point would just be trying to get the wood off the board, just trying to kill the material. Knight d4, but now black can take care of the rest of white's active pieces. Bishop c4, queen back. We get our exchange back, and then once we get our exchange back, it's pretty much game over. And it's interesting. It's mostly game over just because really, no matter what we take with, it's actually very difficult just to hold this pawn. And it's still going to be very difficult to finish our development. We haven't finished developing our entire queenside yet. But, I mean, if, for example, king f1, actually either the move queen d6, hitting this pawn and this pawn here, or the move queen to c4, simply following up with queen captures d4, is going to net a pawn, and then, of course, we still have this huge, massive development lead, and we're basically just winning the game from here. So, and if queen f1, if queen f1, it's similar. We could do just about anything, but queen d5 would probably be easiest, just threatening queen takes d4. It's the same problem. Nothing can really defend you don't have queen c4 because obviously the queen takes it, so nothing can actually defend the d4 square. We're picking up this pawn, and white's development problem still is not solved. This position is plus 3.9, it looks like, for black, so I mean, the computer's giving almost a full piece, even though black is only going to be up a pawn. So, okay, so going back, how else could white try to handle this, and how would black respond? Well, if white just kind of hangs out and does normal stuff, black should just do normal stuff too. Black should just finish his development. And then, of course, white could play a normal move like knight c3 and try to finish his development. And then, of course, black could just do the same. If at any point white decides to do something like c3, d5 is a move that is way back on the table again, because, after e takes d5, queen takes d5, we're hitting that loose bishop. And all these ideas and all these themes work again. And really, if at any point white decides to play c3, like you could play h3, d6, and now if c3, it's still good. Just two-step that pawn from d6 to d5, and d5 is still a super powerful move. So just keep in mind that d5's theme, anytime they try to revert back into something like the Kopech system, d5 is a theme that is going to work. So they could try knight c3, and then here you would just castle. And now here, let's say they play something like rook e1, you could just play a simple move like a6. Now, at this point, black just has a slight edge, because black's position is very, very natural, and black has all of his pieces developed, and white still hasn't finished the development of his queenside, nor does it look like he's going to do so in any timely manner whatsoever. So black just has a very slight edge in terms of development, and it's not a ton to write home about, but it's enough that you can declare your position a little bit better. Just for instance, bishop f1, we could just play rook e8, d3, h6 or bishop e6, and I would say at some point I'm going to be following up, like let's say a3, I'm going to be playing bishop e6, and then at some point maybe I'm going to play d5, and I'm just going to strike in the middle of the board. So like let's say they play something like bishop d2, I'm going to be playing, I could probably even get away with d5 right away, like d5, ed5, knight d5, and they don't have any ability to win material right away. I could just take my space. The computer's giving this as right around equal, but really it's just a little bit better for black. Black just has a little bit more space in the middle of the board. But if you put it off longer, it's apparently a little bit better. Like you can just shuffle back. Like you can play bishop b6, they can play knight e2, you can play knight h5, and you can just start trying to etch out territory and etch out squares. This is just supposed to be slight edge black all day long. So black is just doing really, really well here. Okay, so what's one other way that this can look or this can appear? Well, it does actually come up. Black does do this on occasion. Like I actually run into this variation in the Evans Gambit where black tries it. And here it's actually a little bit more legitimate. What black is actually trying to do, like you can actually see, we've got some top-level games where people have actually done this in the Masters database with both the white pieces and the black pieces. We actually see some examples of this. We see Hayakawa Nakamura versus Robert Hess. We actually have like about 91 games in the Masters database. It's a little bit more legitimate. One of the ideas is they're trying to kind of super fortify this square so that they can get castled. Because a lot of times in the Evans Gambit, like getting castled is kind of an issue. So they're trying to super fortify the square so they can, play something like knight f6, and then after castles they can castle. And at the very least, they've solved this problem. But even in the Evans Gambit, having this bishop on this square isn't a great thing. So like if white just continues normally, like with rook e1, and just protects this pawn, and then black plays something like h6, and again, h6 is kind of this move that at some point, you've almost got to play it. Like, there's sometimes threats of knight g5 and f4, in which case e5 would be a problem. There's different weird things that can happen. So it's like h6 is kind of an obligatory move at some point. But then knight on b to d2. And then here's kind of the clever idea, is we're trying to actually bring this knight to c4. So like if, for example, a6, we could even just shuffle this bishop back. Like we could play bishop to f1. And then the idea would be that at some point we're going to be trying to play knight c4 and knight takes d6. And this makes life very, very awkward for the person playing the black pieces. It's very awkward to respond to this. So like even bishop f1 is a reasonable move here. And there's actually other moves that are reasonable here as well. But like let's say b6, this is again the idea is something like bishop f1 with the idea of something like knight c4. So then we could have something like rook e8, and then we could have knight c4, and we're putting amazing amounts of pressure here, and we're putting pressure here. And this is where the computer actually likes just bringing this bishop back to f8, and then it's just saying this is slight edge white. White's winning this pawn, takes, d takes, and then knight h7, and then bishop f4, and white has kind of this huge space advantage, and this should be slight edge white. So even when we see this move in the Evans Gambit, where black is doing it for much more legitimate reasons, black is doing it to try to hold a pawn, it's still very awkward to play this move and not have problems in the long term, because you're slowing down the development of your entire queen side. And again, in the Evans, black is doing it for much better reasons. Black is doing it because he's trying to hold a pawn, and he's trying to get castled. But he's still completely stunting his queenside development. And because of this, white is actually able to get his pawn back and get more space and just kind of declare that he has some sort of slight advantage in this position. But basically, that's how you handle it when people block their center pawn with their bishop. That's how you take advantage of it. So in a nutshell, the way you take advantage of this is you just kind of develop your pieces naturally. You bring out your knights, you develop your pieces naturally, and then you try to kind of reinforce the idea of at some point playing d4 with the threat of e5 being on the table, because another problem with the bishop being on d6 is this is a very unfortunate placement of the bishop and the knight, because there's always going to be this threat of a fork. And because of this, black is going to have to lose some extra tempo, or white's going to have to lose some extra tempo. Whoever placed his bishop in front of his pawn is going to have to lose some extra tempo because of this potential knight and bishop fork down the road. So anyways, I hope that I explained these concepts well. I hope you found these ideas helpful, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.